Hello, everyone. My name is Maggie Vandenberg with the IQ Business Group. I'm happy to be your moderator for today's webinar, creating an information strategy for 2022. I'm joined today by Ryan Britton, Vice President of Delivery from Mint, and Brian Vanetten, Solution Engineering Manager from AVPOINT. We are proud to sponsor today's webinar to support our public and private sector folks, including Fed, SLED, and our private sector friends seeking knowledge and insight for leveraging a successful Microsoft 365 information strategy for 2022. For folks who have joined us before, thanks for joining us again. And for those we haven't had the pleasure of meeting before, welcome. IQBG is a leading provider of records and information management solutions for the public sector and highly regulated industries. Since 2008, the IQ Business Group has been developing ECRM and content services solutions for highly regulated industries, including public and private sectors, that leverage people, process, and technology to support your requirements.
Hey Maggie, hi Brian. Good to see you both again for another exciting chat about information governance, compliance, and all the related topics, things that get us up in the morning and keep us going. For everyone on the call, my name is Ryan Britton. As Maggie said, I work for an organization called the Mint Group, which is a global Microsoft partner with a 20-year history of success implementing Microsoft technologies. We work predominantly in highly regulated industries and public sector, and we have a host of gold competencies that we carry with us when implementing our consulting services.
And hi, everybody. Greetings from Seattle. My name is Brian Vanetten, and I work for AVPOINT. I've actually been here now 6 years at the end of February, and we've actually been in business since 2001, where we help customers migrate, manage, and protect their SharePoint and Microsoft 365 solutions. So everything from consolidations to helping better govern the workspaces in SharePoint and 365 to helping organizations better organize and control their content by either backing it up or better tagging or controlling the information and access to it so they have better strategies going forward for their content repositories.
Okay, so part of what we do as a group of organizations, IQ, AVPOINT, and Mint, works under the name Smart Compliance. It's a methodology that we built up over a number of years. It includes consulting services. It includes industry knowledge with regards to information management, content management, and records management. And it includes the suite of products that AVPOINT provide, which are best in class for supporting these types of efforts for organizations. And essentially, what we'll be sharing today as we walk through the deck is information and experiences from the trenches implementing these types of solutions in our various markets. Smart Compliance as a methodology falls under the framework that you can see on the right-hand side. Essentially, what we've realized is that there are a lot of layers that need to be implemented when you think about an information governance strategy. You can see them depicted here. You need to think about physical records, information architecture, how you layer collaboration on top of that, how you protect your information, things like physical security as well. And then on top of that, a set of ancillary disciplines and solutions which would be relevant to different types of organizations depending on where they're at, and things like cloud migration, implementing compliance, communities of practice, implementing teamwork practices, all of these types of things that fall under either risk, operations, strategy, automation, or governance, essentially are part of what we've built out through our experiences in implementing information governance solutions in highly regulated industries and public sector. Okay, so we have a quick poll for everybody. We'd appreciate your feedback. The question is, what was the hardest part of 2021 for you? And there's a few options there. I won't read through them, but you can and provide your input. I'm sure there's a few things there that may resonate. They certainly do with me.
Okay, so it looks like most people have voted. Unsurprisingly, the big winner is employees don't put information where it's supposed to go. That's at
Exactly right.
30%. At 6% is cloud migration has disrupted our ecosystem. At 24% is work from home has created havoc. I think we can all relate to that one. At 15% is we struggle to enforce information policies. And at 20% is the amount of information is growing way too fast.
Yeah, I think I experienced all of them. And the
Absolutely.
predominant one, employees don't put things where they're supposed to. IT implementations would be so much easier if it weren't for those pesky humans.
Oh my gosh, right? If only people understood that all things IT should go into the IT site collection, right? Or
Exactly right.
into the project area as defined. However, we all know that people mean well, but sometimes they don't pay attention to a URL path when it comes to where content should go. Though this conversation we're going to have today actually believe will really help our audience here reframe some of the things that they need to do with this strategy. So that's actually very relevant.
Yeah, I agree. And we've tried to put together a set of ideas and things to help folks who are looking at 2022 as a fresh slate and trying to drive out a good information strategy over this year. We think we've got some gems that we can share. But before we get there, let's talk about 2021 in review. As painful as it may be for us to look back, I heard someone the other day say that 2022 is the third part in a trilogy that started in 2020, and sometimes I think we all feel like that.
Mm-hmm.
And block number one there is really related to that. We've had continued pandemic-related issues throughout 2021. The Omicron variant and everything that comes around it, and there really has been a disruption to paper-based workflows, information supply chains, and everything else under the sun that has to do with being productive inside of an information-based organization. We've seen a rise of the remote working culture. I thought it was very interesting. I saw a lot of articles going around about folks who, on the back of the pandemic isolation and lockdown processes, when their organizations opened up their offices again, a whole bunch of people just refused to go back. And I think that there's a new normal that comes along with folks having proven that a work from home and hybrid workplace work ethic can really work. Unfortunately for IT folks, that really means that we have to be a lot more disciplined in the way that we implement our processes and our policies, because it's no longer about ring fencing a single building. Now your information is scattered across a very wide geographic area, and it can be very difficult to manage that.
Right. And to build on top of that too, Ryan, the one thing we're talking about here though is trust, right? How can we trust somebody to be on a personal device in a certain part of the world, or can we even confirm multiple access points when it comes to where they're trying to get information? How do we build a framework that is not only sustainable, but not overly onerous to the end users? Because a lot of organizations last year started talking about implementing 2FA, right, in one form or another, between your mobile device and just getting access to content and making that as least painful as possible for the user experience. So finding that right balance of security versus access is definitely something that's come with what people demanding to work remotely and being trusted to work from various locations or even different platforms.
Exactly right. And Ed from the support desk can no longer swing past your desk on his way to pick up some coffee. It was a lot more difficult to get those things implemented in a remote situation.
For sure.
The other thing is that global data grew from 64 zettabytes to 79 zettabytes. I don't think anyone is actually able to picture visually what a zettabyte is, but it's obviously a huge amount of information. I heard a stat the other day, and I don't know how true it is, but someone was saying that in the last 5 years, we've produced more information than the rest of human history. And the growth in the last year was 23%. So I think it's only going to get more prolific as time goes on. And if you are sitting with your organization and you had a problem that was of X size related to the information and its security and its management and managing it with policies, your problem just got 23% bigger since last year.
And tying to that too, thinking about the long-term costs of even hosting that information or keeping that information secure over its lifetime. The fact that it grew in 1 year almost a quarter in size, and there is no stopping this, right? That's the other thing too. So if we're at a nearly 0.25% rise in a year, I mean, where are things going to go in the next couple of years as we see more merged data types or we see more video related content? So this number will probably be even larger this time next year.
Yeah, exactly right. And then the continued rise of cybercrime. So once again, those pesky humans, I think we're far along in terms of being able to secure information by using MFA and endpoint security and information protection. And there are a lot of measures that we can use to try to do that. But in a lot of cases, social engineering is the place that is our biggest weak spot. And I think one of the things that we're going to raise today is that human beings make mistakes. We can try and build infrastructure around them from an IT perspective that is smart enough to try and accommodate those. The other thing that we can do is try to make our information platform a little smarter, to try and know what information people are working with and to use smart information in order to better inform these types of interactions with information so that we know when they are high risk. And then continued enforcement of information regulation. We're seeing a lot more of this in the news. I'm sure if anyone on the call has been following these types of things, there are lots of highly publicized fines that have gone out to organizations at Amazon, WhatsApp, Vodafone, and there's a list of others. 10.4 billion rand in fines, $1 billion in fines levied against financial institutions alone. It certainly is not something that's going away. The information regulations of the world become more draconian with each passing year, and certainly this is something that should be front and center for every organization, not just those in highly regulated industries anymore, when looking at an information strategy.
And on top of this, Ryan, we're also seeing extra scrutiny and pressure from regulatory agencies, not only in the United States, but we're in the European Union and around the world, around when an organization wants to merge or purchase another organization. Is this good for the marketplace? Is this good for consumers? Is this good for competition? So we're seeing heavier scrutiny of organizations and how they hold on to their information, or even if a company wants to purchase another one as a part of a strategic merger and acquisition, is this allowable by the marketplace, which will also slow things down from a regulatory standpoint. And on top of that, the European Union is coming out with its own digital market authority, which is building its own framework on top of this, which will be very similar to what GDPR will be doing as well when it comes to how information can be shared cross-border and where this information is stored. So this is a rapidly evolving area with a lot of changes and a lot of challenges for a lot of organizations.
Yeah, it certainly seems to be moving apace.
Yes.
Then cloud adoption continues to accelerate. We're really seeing folks moving to the cloud, at least some workloads. I would say that in my personal experience, I don't think that hybrid is anywhere close to being over. I think most organizations have an element of information which is sitting on physical assets that they've perhaps purchased and they're looking to sweat, or otherwise makes sense to keep on premise in terms of its sensitivity. But I would say that most organizations are flirting with cloud, and most organizations are at least considering certain workloads that they're trying to move across. And I think we've seen a rise in the number of folks trying to implement cloud governance on Microsoft 365, as well as records management, these types of things.
Yeah, we're seeing a tilt here, Ryan, on our side for sure, that a lot of organizations still find their world in two different buckets, that they have a custom app they still need to support for a period of time, though the shift we're markedly seeing, though, is from an investment standpoint. More and more organizations are trying to simplify their cost management and security framework by just having a cloud-first strategy, or trying to think about how they can take a business process that's worked a certain way and use the new frameworks instead of M365, like the Power Apps, and as you mentioned with self-service management and governance, there's definitely a lot more there when it comes to that adoption and how things are shifting.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a good segue to the next topic, which is, as much as human beings are necessary in order to perform certain tasks from an information management perspective, it's becoming overwhelming given the growth of information to try and manage those repositories in totality. And a lot of what we're seeing is that we're looking to augment information management processes with artificial intelligence and machine learning, these types of things. Being able to classify information automatically, identify sensitive information that sits inside of a document. And I think that these types of things are important, certainly. I don't think that AI is going to completely replace taking a step back and implementing a well-planned information ecosystem to, well structured in terms of what goes where and how things are created, what the life cycle of a document looks like. I think that that's really the best approach to ensuring that your ecosystem is as productive and compliant as can be. And then on top of that, having a really good AI system that is looking for sensitive information and these types of things is really a can't be beaten scenario.
Yeah, real quick, just to reinforce your point there, Ryan, AI is definitely not a panacea. It's something that does require input, planning, and thought, because unstructured data at the end of the day is still unstructured data, even to a smart system that can quickly recognize patterns at scale. So when applying something like AI to be able to find sensitive information in your organization, or even be able to have an effective tagging framework, it's something you have to think about iteratively. It's not just going to be a flip a switch and all of a sudden AI solves all of our problems. It's intended to augment, not necessarily replace right now, the way that humans need to help find and search for information and be responsible for it. It'll get there, but we still need to think about the planning in those aspects as well.
Yeah, that's so true. Okay, Maggie, we can move on.
And we have another poll for everybody. Tell us, what is your most important information related goal in this next year? What is it that you need to do to get your organization on track or stay on track? That poll is up on your screens, so go ahead and vote on that.
I see that get rid of those pesky humans is not an option.
We will have to add that for next time. Okay, so it looks like most people have voted. 20% say that they need to accelerate cloud adoption. 20% say they need their employees to be more conscious about their information. 12% say they need to focus on security. A full 40% say they need to implement information governance policies, and 6% say we need to understand the cost of storage and recovery.
Okay, and that brings us to the meat and potatoes, as it were, of our topic today. We have, through great deliberation, come up with 10 steps to information governance success for our listeners to try and implement over the course of 2022 to end this year on a fantastic footing. And so first and foremost, and it should come as no surprise, evaluate your current situation. As much as this seems like a logical first step, I often find that today's work environments are so hectic and so disjointed and fractured that it's actually difficult to do this kind of situational analysis. Nevertheless, when you're in the depths of the jungle, the best way to figure out where you are is to climb a tree and take a look around. And certainly I would say that that applies here. In many cases, if you have a difficult task to tackle, a good first step is to clean your desk. As much as that's not going to help you complete your task, being organized and getting everything where it should be is a good way to start off an effort of any type. And there's a few things that we've put here as a list of things you might consider if you're committing to this. Some of those things: review your retention schedule. Brian was saying how quickly these regulations are evolving, and oftentimes it can be difficult to stay on top of those. A review of your retention schedule to see what you are obligated to retain in terms of federal statutes, statewide regulation, industry-specific regulations, or even company policies is a good first step, and get that document set up and ready for action for this year.
Yeah, and to build on that, Ryan, really quickly, a lot of organizations say, well, I just don't know what we can even hold on to or get rid of. And I actually strongly sympathize with that from my experience. You have to start somewhere, though. So this is actually a really good opportunity with IT teams to go and engage with teams such as your HR team or your legal team and understand, maybe an employee turnover scenarios. Where are we holding on to information? Or how long do we need to hold on to this from a legal standpoint? So that way you can at least start this conversation and start targeting the different areas and repositories that you're responsible for holding on to. Because a good example is when you unlicense a user in 365, it puts into a deletion cycle their OneDrive and their Exchange account, right? So do we need to hold on to the information in a backup for a period of time, and then start having that conversation over what is valuable versus what is necessary to hold on to from compliance purposes? And just to keep going, Ryan, I'll talk about the second bullet point here, reviewing your information governance and protection policies. When we talked to a lot of customers here at AVPOINT, we talked to a lot of customers who have gone through the exercise of governance, right? They've gone through, talked to different parts of the organization, they agreed to a certain framework, and then they wrote up a nice PowerPoint deck or a series of documentations and wiki pages and said, here's our governance policy. And then 3 years later, nobody remembers any aspect of what that actually was supposed to be. So when we say governance and protection policies, these are intended to be ways of looking at the living framework and rule set that an organization wants to set on their workloads that they provide as business applications. So how do we go about on a regular basis, whether that's annually, semi-annually, quarterly, whatever your cadence is, going through and ensuring that the policies as written are actually being enforced and followed, and then finding out where the actual practical realities of a good governance policy come into play. And we can definitely talk more about that from a solution standpoint, but that's usually a really good start from a recognition standpoint to see where things are with how you thought things were going to go versus how things really are going out there in the wild.
Yeah, it's a good point. I was actually reading through a policy document the other day that required a signature and acceptance, the drill. And I was thinking to myself, this is such legalese, and it's such a ponderous document of so many pages. I wonder if there is anyone actually who, as they go about their day, goes, wait, before I perform this action, I should go and check my IT policy to see whether or not this is in compliance. I mean, it's a very difficult thing. I can't imagine working like that day in and day out.
Exactly. And so that's what I'm talking about, the practicality of a framework here. How can we ensure that our technical or legalese behind what we want to ensure is a secure but open place for people to work is also enforceable? So those practicalities are really where this conversation gets very interesting. When the IT team finally reaches out to the business and starts having these conversations around governance, we suddenly realize that the paper process does not match the actual reality, and it becomes a way for us to better engage the business on this, because this is so crucial to getting so many other things right on this slide.
Yeah. Okay, and then the next point is map out your information landscape. So this is a good exercise. Even if in your head you have a good idea of what sits where, the process of going and actually mapping this out to say, well, we have X number of mainframes and this information, this type of information is there, and we have these file shares, and we've got an open text records management server, and we've got our Microsoft 365 environment with SharePoint Online, and just the process of going out and understanding this, not forgetting what is sitting on people's laptops. What is the culture of storage? Do most people store stuff inside of OneDrive? What is in there? The process of just going and mapping this out and creating a treasure map of what is where is really a valuable mental exercise.
Yeah, and then also keeping track of it as new applications are added or removed over time, and just building out that process and having one source of truth for this as well, right, Ryan? Because I've built many VisioDoc with organizations to help frame where these things are intended to go, and then understanding where it actually goes. How much of this is ending up on someone's laptop or mobile device, and what sort of settings do we need to put if something were to happen to one of those devices? Thinking about those things as part of your strategy, and as we talk about other settings here, really important to keep that in mind. With you can put something in place, but doesn't mean it's always being used in the way as intended.
Yeah, exactly. All right, and then once you have that map, the next step is to determine the size, cost, and composition of each of these repositories. And this can be difficult, definitely. And there are ways that you can do this in order to make it easier. In general, if we're doing a migration for a customer, for instance, we'll find that although they have an idea of the fact that all the business units have their own folders and it sits on this file share, but they're able to just go create the subfolders in whatever structure they want to. You can take steps like saying, well, what is the aging of information? You know, if you look at this year on year, what is the number of gigabytes per year that we're sitting with? And if you relate that back to your retention schedule, you can start to get an idea of how much of this information you would want to migrate, for instance. You also obviously have your costs. And if you're looking at size, you get an idea of how much it's costing you to store this historic data. And the most difficult one is probably the composition. Most organizations who are using file shares, for instance, are not able to tag their documents in such a way that they can tell the difference between certain types of information, such that they could build a report on it. And so in a lot of cases, if you're looking at a folder and it's got 1,000 files in it, it's very difficult to say, I can tell the difference between what is a record inside of here, for instance, versus what is a working document versus what is incorrectly filed.
For sure. And just to keep things going, because I know we're almost at halfway, the audit and security process for your repositories, this comes down to like what I mentioned earlier about employee turnover. How do we ensure that a user doesn't have access, for example, even after they've left the organization? Or even, for example, just a regular review of the workspaces to ensure the users who have access, like contractors or even just the ownership of a workspace. How do we confirm that the users need that access and they should sustain that access for a given period of time? I've run into many organizations, and I'm sure you too as well, Ryan, that they didn't even realize that somebody still had access even though they had left the organization years ago. So thinking about how your security framework can really impact, and with how SharePoint and M365 works on that permissions model, becomes very crucial to ensuring your sensitive information and the content repositories you keep for these long periods of time have the right level of access for the users who actually need it.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, and then try to determine the level of compliance and ROT within each repository. So ROT being redundant, obsolete, and trivial information. And oftentimes it's much easier to say to folks, well, let's put everything into two buckets: business critical or ROT. That's a good first step to trying to understand how you can better manage your information, as much as you will need to dig down a little deeper. Digging down into the non-ROT type or ROT information, which ordinarily in an average business is only 12% of the data, is a lot easier and less costly than trying to perform the same exercise on the entire repository.
And this is where I see a lot of rub and pushback from the organization, right? And I'm sure you've seen this too with the customers you've worked on. When you talk to an end user and say, well, help me understand what is ROT content to you, they say, well, everything is valuable to me. And not realizing, as you mentioned, roughly 88% of the content that they have created over their lifetime hasn't been accessed within the last 30 days of it being created. So it might be valuable. It's more like it could be valuable versus actually valuable to the business. So how do we help the organization better think about this so that way we're holding on to the vital information we're required to hold on to versus holding on to everything forever because we can.
Yeah. All right, and then finally, review IT and strategic pipeline to evaluate what will change this year. And I've got a list of anecdotes over the last 3 years of IT projects where we performed a certain endeavor on behalf of the IT department, only to find halfway through that the records management department had a similar project which they were funding, and that these were competing at ends, or otherwise doing an implementation for the compliance officers and finding out that there is a SharePoint migration that impacts that halfway through. These types of things, because of the nature of how fractured these types of projects have become and how large organizations can get and how difficult it is to do that when you have these distributed work scenarios, it's very easy to have projects that butt heads with one another. And so speaking to all of the different departments of the organization and trying to come up with a single IT project pipeline, or not IT, project IT related pipeline, so that you can try and identify these types of dependencies early on is crucial. And as much as you may go, well, that's pretty obvious, I can promise you that there have been a few times in the last few years where what if everyone had been talking to each other effectively, or there'd been some kind of visible pipeline, that folks would have realized that they were working on the same initiatives or overlapping initiatives.
Yeah, I can't emphasize that point enough, Ryan. I have seen that happen at almost every organization, that people didn't realize that others were also thinking about this in a slightly different way specific to their side of business. So that is a very crucial and salient point with where we're going with the next couple steps as well to consider. Is go out there and be communicated with the business, because you'd be surprised what people are thinking about.
Yeah. Okay. All right, step number 2, determine your goals for 2022. So forearmed and forewarned, having gone through the exercise of looking at your collateral like record series and evaluating your repositories and looking at the project pipeline for the organization and getting an idea of all of the moving parts that are relevant to an information governance strategy this year. Step 2 would then be, okay, well, what do we actually want to achieve this year? And some of the ideas is to circulate what you've discovered with stakeholders and to try and build a business case. And building a business case is something really crucial, because a lot of times when you're talking about implementing transformative information programs, governance programs, these types of things, it's really seen as a grudge purchase. Can we get away with not doing it and just keep what we're doing, because we'd much rather focus on stuff that is central to our organization's mission or vision, or the things that we need to do on a day-to-day basis, and not spend all of this time on this grudge purchase. Something that I've realized, though, is that you look at what it takes to build in compliance, for instance. A lot of the attestations that you would have to make when you're looking to reach certain privacy goals or industry standards and regulations, as this has to do with understanding the type of information you have, classifying that information, putting good information workflows in place. And the process of doing that can actually have a profit for a business as well. There's a lot of cases where if you have a well-organized information ecosystem, people are able to find information more easily. There's a study that says that 4.5 hours a week is spent looking for information in most organizations. If you can reduce that and increase productivity, that is a good thing to have in a business case, because that is really a tangible output that you can use to justify expenditure on compliance and information governance. Likewise, if we're talking about getting more organized with information, a lot of the automation projects that folks are trying to implement, RPA and these types of things, it really relies on being able to identify information so that you can work on it in an automated fashion. And having a well-constructed information taxonomy will really help you in that endeavor, and make that, give you a broader scope of opportunity with automation and allow you to further reduce your overheads. Likewise, if you have well-organized information from a security standpoint, you can say, well, I understand what our business critical information is, and I'm able to apply my budget from an IT security perspective to focus the security measures on that type of information, rather than painting every single document in the entire organization with the same brush, simply because I can't differentiate between those types of information. And likewise, if you're able to identify what is critical and what is not critical, perhaps you can drastically reduce your storage costs. So there's a lot that can go into building a business case like this that can actually make this type of endeavor a profitable one, if you're careful with how you measure these things and the type of tangible outputs that you expect to get from such a dry project, if I can put it that way. Okay, and then moving swiftly along, because we are having a bit of a ramble. As much fun as it is, we want to make sure that we get through everything in the allocated time. You want to obtain support as well. And again, it doesn't help to have gone out to RFP and to have obtained budget and to get to a point where when you actually need to implement a certain endeavor, the fact that you haven't obtained IT support up front, or that folks aren't aware of what you're trying to accomplish, can really hamper a project once it gets underway. And so really turning folks into advocates and getting people involved and taking the time to communicate your intentions and get additional advice from folks who are outside of your business unit, these can be really great things to pursue as you put this business case together, so that you move forward with the business case and a number of advocates more than folks who are unaware of what you're trying to achieve. And then finally, you obviously need to consider and acquire a budget. You know, the golden task. Find the money now that you have a good idea of the goals that you want to do, and you have a good idea of what the environment looks like and the types of problems that you want to solve. And that really sets you up for success in achieving what you need to in 2022.
Yeah, and real quick, just to add on that, the way I always look at this when justifying this with the business is either give, get, or win-win. Talking to them about, if I give this, I get this in return, or how can we work on this from a strategy standpoint to win on both sides? I solve my problem and you guys are still able to collaborate quickly and effectively. Or even, for example, taking the reverse of that and saying the cost of doing nothing is this. We can't sustain this because of the rule set that we need to follow from where information management is coming from and what we have to think about. So all of these things are super crucial when tying these things together.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Okay, next slide, Maggie, if you don't mind.
Right. So I'll go ahead and take this. Do you want me to take this one, Ryan?
No. Go right ahead, sir.
Sure. So thinking about your information landscape, because we talked to a lot of customers who come from the on-prem world and think about their information in what I'll say is in a classical sense, right? That they have, as you can see at the top of the slide, an internet portal where they publish official information from the different parts of the business for them to quickly share. That's great. That is still a very valuable thing to do, that you have a single source of truth with your content, that this is the area we all agree is going to be the source of truth, and we will continuously update as policies and systems change, that this information is provided here. In the M365 landscape, though, we now have a different, a much more decentralized and flattened world with things like teams and groups and SharePoint sites and OneDrive and Exchange, and how people are using these different systems that used to be separate all now talk to each other in this world. So thinking about how we actually not only have a source of truth for static information in an intranet format, but also where people are actually working every day, sharing this information, for example, inside of a Microsoft team, or for example, just informal ways for them to chat and share and link information. Teams has been such a massive game changer with how it has unified this framework. But that leads to the challenge too at the backside of how do we retain information in the appropriate location? How do we actually get the business to say this Microsoft team is now finished, we don't need this project anymore? How do we move it and keep the information that is valuable, but dispose of the workspace once it's finished its end of life processes? Or even, for example, as you can see on here, how do we work with external users? How do we want to ensure that any of our contractors or customers who have access to our workspaces do this in a secure way? Do they have access to anything in the intranet, or do they have access to anything in a particular workspace? How do we go about enforcing that? All of those things are super critical when it comes to that security framework and thinking about how we can enable collaboration but do it safely.
Yeah, it's so true. And a lot of organizations that have kind of had to react to work from home and have gone ahead and activated teams and have allowed folks to create teams as they need them. They're sitting in a sad situation where they have team or SharePoint sites sprawl, where the IT department is now saddled with a decision on which team should be deleted. Do we keep the information? Do we back it up? Do we put it into retention with a records strategy? All of those types of things. And as you say, it really is good to have a design such as like we've got here, where you're thinking about what is the life cycle of a project and how do we tie that to our information cycle? How do communities evolve, and how do we manage those as a type of team that gets created? They say taking some taking the time to plan. I think it's part of a military anecdote where they say, you know, no battle plan lasts more than 5 minutes into the insurrection, but you don't want to be on the side without the plan. And I think that is just as true when it comes to planning out SharePoint environments and Teams workspaces. You really should take the time to plan what the life cycle of those artifacts look like in relation to your information strategy.
For sure.
Okay, next slide. Okay, so information taxonomies have long been the purview of folks who are in the compliance and records management space, but they're really becoming something that can't be overlooked in the collaboration space either. So these two spaces historically were very separated from each other. You know, you had a collaboration space, which was the Wild West, and folks created documents and did what they needed to do to get their job done. And then at a point in time, that document would become a record and would move into a record system. And the world of records management is such that information needs to be classified, life cycles need to be understood, metadata is important, and it's really highly governed from that aspect. And what we're finding as folks move to the cloud and as cloud systems like Microsoft 365 become more mature is that these worlds are colliding. And part of what is happening as these worlds collide is folks are starting to say, well, the document lifecycle starts in the collaboration space. When someone is creating a document with the intent of collaborating and sharing and co-authoring and all these wonderful things, it's at that point in time that you want to be classifying this information. And as such, you really want to take the time to then say, well, inside of these collaboration spaces, can we drive out an informational taxonomy that will help us identify the type of document that is being worked on? This is valuable because if people are saying, I want to create a legal document, you can tie that to a template. You can drive CI and standards and all of those types of things. But at the same time, you're classifying the document right up front. And that also means that when you start to use things like AI and you start to work with these intelligent informational systems, that you're able to tell the difference between a Word document that is that contains the latest lunch menu from the cafeteria and a Word document that contains a list of your clients with all of their credit card numbers. Because as much as the bits and bytes of those two documents are very similar, they have very different value to the organization. And no one has yet made headline news because their lunch menu was leaked by hackers.
Right. And one thing I want to emphasize here real quick, Ryan, and to your point is I think a lot of organizations tend to overthink taxonomies to get them crawling, walking, and running. So start simple and start with, you know, public, private, internal, confidential, highly confidential, or whatever the roughly 5 best taxonomy labels you would want to use inside the organization. Because we find that if you overthink and over tag and label or give end users too many options, they tend to just throw their hands up in the air and say, I don't know the difference between an accounting and a finance document. This is both, but I only get to choose one. So trying to help think with your business about this simply, and then as it matures in the different parts of the business that are already aligned to highly compliant frameworks like accounting, like finance, like your legal and HR teams, you can then spread out from there and mature and highly target that taxonomy further down the road, but start somewhere and start simply.
Yeah, exactly. And the record schedule can inform that in a lot of cases, because that will tell you, you know, based on your legal obligations, what information should be grouped together. And likewise, you know, you want to try and make this as try and structure this so you have as little manual intervention as possible. Now, if I'm in the legal department and you see we have a legal documents classification there, if I go to the library where I create my contracts and I say new contract and I get to work, what I've done is I've classified it. I didn't have to go and make a choice and say I want to tag this document. Just where I was creating it allowed me to infer certain information about that type of document. And I think that building intelligent information taxonomies of this type, where folks go about their day and where they're doing things informs what type of information they're working on, those type of workflows are valuable to try and alleviate the inevitability of folks going, I don't have time, I'm too busy, I'm not going to classify my information.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point, Ryan.
Yep. All right, next slide. Do you want to take this one, Brian?
Happily, let's do this. So even though we're talking, or in the previous slides, about the content level and how we think about the actual individual bits of information users use on a regular basis, we actually also want to be cognizant of the higher level, the workspace level, and how we want to potentially govern that depending on the type of business unit we're talking about. Because we find time and again within the organization that a one-size-fits-all governance policy doesn't work well. I mean, you have to start somewhere, but as soon as you start getting the intricacies of how your project team versus your HR versus your IT team versus your accounting team or whatever business units your organization supports, they have their own nuances with how they want to work and what they should be responsible for within their workspaces. Now, to be clear, like I mentioned earlier, a workspace in my mindset means a SharePoint site collection, a group, a team, a Yammer group, a project site, all those workloads that contain business valuable information over the course of an organization's history is what I'm talking about governing. So when I say workspaces, that's what I'm talking about. And what we have on this in step 5 here is thinking about designing an information and governance framework, is thinking about for the different departments and organizations your business supports inside of M365 or any collaboration platform for that matter. Maybe we want to set policies separately for these different business units based on how they work, who they work with, and how they need to be able to share and hold on to their information over its life cycle. Because maybe, for example, in Department A, no external sharing should be allowed. That's our accounting team. That's internal, and it's very business sensitive, and nobody can see this because it can impact our public perception, our marketing, and everything else. Only internal people should have access to that. Whereas maybe in Department B, wide open, it's our marketing team. They work with a bunch of different organizations. They need to be able to share in various platforms. But all the things are checked through an oversight of the IT team to make sure only the right people have access to these workspaces and that there's some enforceability and accountability there. Whereas, in Department C, we hold on to things for a certain period of time, but then there's a recertification process on an annual basis that this information is confirmed and affirmed for by an end user in that part of the business to ensure that content is properly held on to and that we can point back to that user in 3 or 4 months' time and say, Sally over here agreed that this content is still good to go and we're using it. We haven't seen any activity. What do we need to do with it? So helping you think through these things is what we're talking about from a governance standpoint and helping you think about how to better control your workspaces and that sprawl going forward.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, and then step 7 on the next slide. Sorry, step 6 on the next slide. Yep. Okay, so this is really speaking to the importance of planning your teams and collaboration workspaces. So as you implement teams, one of the things that folks realize after having used it for a number of months is that there are different types of teams, and different types of teams will stay around for different periods of time. You may have a departmental team that will be around for as long as the department is around. You may have a project-focused team, which you want to wrap up after the project ends, and maybe some of that information goes into a record system and some of that information goes into a central archive. And perhaps you have a different type of team that is location specific, and another team that is going to be around for as long as a particular resource is around, and another team that is there more or less permanently, which represents knowledge that is being gathered. Lots of different types of teams, lots of different types of life cycles. Some teams, it's perfectly normal to have no activity for 6 months. In others, as soon as that happens, it's an indication that that team should be wrapped up. And really what we're saying is that it behooves an organization to spend some time designing these types of workspaces and really understanding how they could structure this, and being explicit about creating this type of departmental structure, for instance, and provisioning certain types of teams. And I think where this really comes into play is that this type of planning really informs a process where you would implement a team's governance product. Like I can think of a few occasions. I know that you guys, Brian, have a fantastic team's governance product in cloud governance. And a lot of times that really brings some power to the IT organization, because they can provision teams really quickly, and they can send out notifications to ask certain people to vet whether or not the team needs to be around still, or if there's been a change of ownership, or lots of types of mechanisms that are perhaps missing from the baseline Teams implementation that you get from Microsoft 365. But an IT person would not be able to design those types of policies. It really takes the business owners to be able to say, well, we need a departmental team that is going to be around for X amount of time, and these are the two owners, and these are the types of policies we want in terms of sharing. And so that type of getting to the point where business units are empowered to be able to design those types of teams really is a hand-holding exercise, and really requires an element of planning to build out these teams' life cycles and really understand the team's environment.
For sure. And just to add on top of that, though, while keeping it as user-centric as possible, because we find time and again when things are overly centralized or bottlenecked to an IT person for either approval or for consent to do something, we find that the system you're providing becomes unusable because of that bottleneck. So always think about this in the framework of a user-centric model, and you and the organization will thrive when being able to give some strategic choices when it comes to how they want to do things.
Yeah. Okay, step 7.
Yep.
Okay, so planning for cloud migration. One of the things that we know is that migration is not something that is a one-time event in most organizations that are dealing with hybrid work and the next 5 years. Instead, it will happen in bits and pieces over the course of that time. Perhaps you'll reach a point where your file servers will move across, and you might want to migrate off a particular on-premise records management system and move your records into the clouds. These types of things will happen at points in time. And there's a lot that needs to go into making sure that migrations work very effectively. As much as there are really good tools like AVPOINT's Fly that will allow you to implement this with a set of rules and really make the technical implementation painless, it is really important to go through a process of, as we said, analyzing what your information is before you move it, thinking about how you want to move this, perhaps in stages, perhaps over time, perhaps you only want to move certain date ranges, and putting that strategy into a plan, and then finally getting into a place where you can implement and operationalize. And there's a lot that goes into things that are pretty nuanced, like what do we do from a business continuity perspective if we're busy migrating information, but folks are still busy working on that information? How do we manage those deltas? How do we ensure that we have business continuity throughout this process? And so planning for this is definitely something that you should do, rather than the throw it into the cloud and we'll figure it out later strategy.
For sure. And the only thing I'll point out here real quick, because I know we're short on time, is do take the time to analyze your information and present that to the business. That is so crucial, as Ryan pointed to with our Fly migration tool. Discovery is so crucial to a successful migration, and talking to the business about what's valuable to move. To emphasize that point, do that with the business, and that exercise will make the migration so much easier once you realize what's valuable information to move and what is raw content.
Yeah. Step 8, if you please, Maggie. All right, so step 8 is about instigating a culture shift. And this is probably the secret sauce in these types of implementations, and something that if you're looking at informational transformation this year, you should really focus on, because it's not just about implementing the tech. It's about understanding that what will probably need to happen is a cultural shift within the organization. Folks need to work with information in a different way. They'll be creating it in the cloud. They're going to have to deal with policies that are being implemented as they start to work in different types of information. There'll be informational workflows, which can be of great assistance to them, but can be a great hindrance if they don't understand how they work. And so, once again, those pesky humans, we really can't do this without them. We need to make sure that we really pay the right amount of respect to the journey that these kind of transformations require of the folks who are involved in them. And there are a few things that you can do in order to get that right. I've listed them here, and in the interests of time, I'm not going to spend too much time going over them, but develop a center of excellence and start to really think of information due diligence as a point of excellence for the organization. Develop a community of practice and get people's opinions on how to make things better. Generate standard operating procedures and help folks to understand how they can work with information in the most productive way, and justify that by showing them how it can make them more productive and reduce their admin. get change management right from the get-go. That goes hand in hand with effective communication. You should be communicating the changes that are coming. You should be training at the right point in time, and you should be measuring adoption after the fact so that you can really help folks if they're struggling to adapt to a new environment, to drive interventions that will assist them in getting on the right track by using data and telemetry to see whether the adoption that you were expecting is really unfolding after you've made the change.
Yes, that's all I'll say to that. Couldn't agree more. Culture shift is very important to consider.
Yep. Then step 9 is risk and cost, right? The two big question marks. And there's a few things that go into this. You know, a lot of folks, when they start to think about cloud, don't consider a cloud archiving solution. It's a great option to think about once you have these informational life cycles mapped out, that you may be able to reduce your cost by moving your information into a lower cost archiving solution. Consider cloud backup solutions, being able to go and retrieve a certain version of a document from a backup once it's been deleted and no one realized that it was gone until 6 months down the line. That can be a real lifesaver in terms of the value of that document. Implement pervasive records management. In other words, folks are dealing with information on a day-to-day basis. They are part of the records management cycle without even realizing it, perhaps. Implement the identity information, endpoint and device protection so that you reduce the cost of and risk of information loss. Long-term preservation is an interesting one. Having an external archive where if you have to keep content for 30 years, that you have a solution that is able to cater for that. Engineer or modernize processes like e-discovery, data subject requests. Consider physical records management and possible needs to move electronic record keeping. Look at compliance events which may impact your organizational risk, like M1921. So NARA will only accept electronic records from next year. That's something that is a significant event on most people's calendars for this year. And finally, things like CPRA, which is the evolution of CCPA. You were discussing this, Brian. I don't know if you have a quick anecdote on this topic while we move on in the interest of time.
Yeah, real quick, is that these legal frameworks are also changing, and the CPRA, which is California rights versus the data protection element. California is definitely a thought leader here in the United States when it comes to how organizations are responsible for user-related information and how they're responsible for deleting it when asked, and how that's also being modeled so closely in GDPR in the European Union as well. These things are not standing still; they are moving. So keeping an eye on how these impact your business is crucial to not getting caught flat-footed as these things change.
Yeah, exactly. It really is a rapidly changing landscape that introduces risk without folks even realizing it. All right, and then finally, step 10, measure, don't guess. So this is our big objective, and perhaps yours, for 2022. A lot of the organizations that we speak to who are trying to go on some kind of informational journey have an idea of where they're at, but can't measure it. And I think that organizations, by and large, are changing to the point where making data-driven decisions is becoming crucial, and getting the right telemetry to inform decisions is becoming crucial. And so being in a position to know what the compliance score is, you know, that not, well, we have a record schedule and our compliance is pretty low, and some business units are better than other, being able to say, well, our level of compliance to our record schedule is exactly 68% because we have these deltas, and we can tell that because we get the telemetry off of our Microsoft 365 infrastructure, because we've set up our information ecosystem in such a way that we can see what hasn't been classified. These are the types of almost nirvana goals that are actually very achievable if you get the rest of these steps right. Being able to tell what your security store is, knowing exactly where your information is. If it's sitting on people's OneDrives, do you know that it's there? If it should be a record and it's sitting on people's OneDrives, are you able to point at that information? Are you able to measure exactly what your risk and exposure is based on knowing what the compliance regulations are that you're obligated to, and knowing whether or not you're actually meeting those standards? Do you know your RPO and RTO for backup? What is your internal information governance and compliance? In other words, how compliant are folks to your policies that you put in place for information governance? How many of my teams are redundant and can be deleted? Do you have the exact number? How many guest users have access to information beyond the scope of their work? How much money can we save through consolidation, archiving, and automation? How much business critical information do we have versus rot? And what is the value that we can bring through AI for compliance in a quantifiable manner? Essentially, what we're saying here is it is possible to get to a place where these are not bad feelings that we have risk, or a general idea that compliance is low, or we think we may have a security risk, but actually you're getting to the point where the analytics, which is really the promise of cloud, is actually able to deliver on being able to measure these types of metrics on a day-to-day basis as a compliance officer, as a person who's responsible for IT information security, and so forth. Okay, and then careening into the finish line, we do have a free workshop that we would like to offer anyone who is listening. If some of the things that we've been talking about are interesting to you and you would like to spend some time with us in order to understand how you could apply these to your organization, or to get an idea of where you are in terms of maturity in some of the aspects that we've been talking about, please reach out to us. We'd be delighted to have the conversation. That is at no cost. You can see that we have an email address in the top right there. That is the person to contact. That is our own delightful Maggie, who is on the call. And I think that you can close us off then, Maggie, on that note. Right. Okay. Thank you then for joining us. Hope you enjoyed the content. If you have any ideas about things you would like to hear about, please reach out to us. Let us know what topics interest you, what burning issues you'd like us to address. We'd love to take the time to address those in our next webinar.
And hey, Ryan, real quick, we did get one question from an audience member about setting up the Records and Compliance Center in 365. Is that something that Mint Group can help with, or because we have our own take on this as well at AVPOINT, but I wanted to at least give you a moment to answer that because it was directed to you.
Yes, absolutely. So that is something that we do on a regular basis, and setting up the file plan, the retention labels, the retention policies are certainly something that is front and center for a lot of organizations. It's something that Mint can help with. What we do find though is that you can get a certain amount of the journey done using just the compliance center, and certainly your existing licensing, and sweat that, and that is a definite strategy. There is another product, which is AVPOINT's product, Brian, which you probably know quite well, which is Cloud Records. If there's an element of physical records management, or if you're looking for advanced scenarios, then that's probably the way to go there. Either way, we should probably have a conversation.
For sure. That's the only comment I wanted to make, is if they are mature in it, we can happily help you with alternate solutions to build on top of it. But if you need to start that conversation, yeah, the Mint Group and Ryan's team can absolutely help with getting you started there for sure.
All right. Thanks so much, everybody, for coming on. And please reach out to me if you want to learn more about our workshops, or if you have any questions that didn't get answered in this session. Thanks so much, everybody. Thanks so much, Ryan and Brian.
Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.